Moses, a man of selfless dedication, chapter 8, a book from Chuck Swindoll, God's Will, God's Way. By way of review, Moses' life was broken down into thirds, 40 years thinking he was somebody, 40 years learning he was nobody, and in the last 40 years, seeing God do something with a nobody. Again, by way of review, there are certain events and certain processes. If you're from Canada, you'd say process, but that's neither here nor there. There's an event, Moses, 3 months old, taken from his house into Pharaoh's house. And there's the verse associated with that event. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. Then there was a process. It's a 40-year process. And Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was mighty in his words and deeds. You now have another event. Moses at age 40 strikes the Egyptian, and he's doing God's will his way. And there's the verse, he looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he struck down the Egyptians and hid them in the sand. Then follows another process. Remember how the Lord your God led you all the way in the desert these 40 years to humble you and to test you? In everybody's life, there are events and there are processes. I had an event on December 9th, 1979. I was saved from the penalty of sin. That was my salvation date. I've been going through a process, and the process is called sanctification. I was first justified never sinned, and now I'm being sanctified, set apart. I'm going through a process in that during that process, as I walk with the Lord, I'm being saved from the power of sin. That's called progressive sanctification. And ultimately, one day, by death or by rapture, I'll be saved from the presence of sin. But Moses has gone through a series of events and a series of processes that now sets him up to another event, Moses and the burning bush. And we see there, do not come near, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. And that series of processes and events shifts him from God's will, his way, to God's will, God's way. And so we took a look at that word holy or separated. And what's happening is this event is separating Moses from the prior 80 years of his life. And now we're going to concentrate for the remainder of the study on this last 40 years, this last third. God's will, God's way. Now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall speak. He's going to have 2 messages, one for the Hebrews and one for Pharaoh. And they're going to be received 2 very different ways. To the Hebrews, God also said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, and thus I am to be remembered throughout all generations. Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, has appeared to me, saying, I have observed you and what has been done to you in Egypt, and I promise that I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt to the land of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey, and they will listen to your voice. That was the Hebrew message, and they will listen to your voice. The Pharaoh message, not so much. And you and the elders of Israel shall go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. And now please let us go a 3 days journey into the wilderness that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. The JTSV version, He will not listen. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. So I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. After that, he will let you go. In my Bible, at that verse, I have marked Proverbs 1, verse 24, and in a few minutes, you'll understand why. And I will give this people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. And when you go, you shall not go empty. But each woman shall ask of her neighbor, and any woman who lives in her house, for silver and gold jewelry. Basically, it's the salary that they haven't been given for the past 400 years. And for clothing, and you shall put them on your sons and on your daughters, and you shall plunder the Egyptians. The only problem is, he didn't make it to Egypt yet. And we're going to go through a series of events as he's moving from the backside of the desert to Egypt. He's right now in our narrative, we're at the burning bush. He's going to say his goodbyes to Jethro. He's going to take Zipporah and the kids. Zipporah and the kids come so far into the backside of the desert, and then they do a U-turn, and ultimately he shows up in Egypt. So Moses returns to Egypt. Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, "Please let me go back to my brothers in Egypt to see whether they are still alive." And I added the word, really? Is that why he's going back? Is that what the Lord told him he's going back for? Do you think maybe Moses is hedging his bets? He didn't go to Jethro and say, "Hey, Jethro, let me show you the staff to the snake trick. Let me show you the leprosy trick. Let me turn some water into..." He didn't do any of those things. He didn't mention that he was going to be the deliverer. He simply said, "I'm going to go back. Or may I go back?" And Jethro said, "Go in peace." Now, there's a message here. Those that have to resign a job for a different job, those that shift a church for a different church, let me say, if you come to Mount Vernon and you say, "Oh, I was a member of such and such church, I want to change my membership," Mount Vernon will ask that we go back to that other church and see that go in peace. Or if there's no go in peace, simply understand what the situation is, because sometimes there is no go in peace. On a more pragmatic and back to the job situation, I would tell you, if you're a working person, don't ever burn a bridge. When a man's ways please the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. Well, you know, the book of Proverbs, all scripture is given by the inspiration of God, and it's profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, and for instruction in righteousness. The book of Proverbs has a series of principles in them. They're not guarantees. Here's a great case in point. Moses goes and talks to Jethro, and they're at peace. Jethro is losing his shepherd for the past 40 years. He's losing his daughter and his grandsons. Egypt, Moses is in God's will. We're studying God's will, God's way. But Pharaoh never did come to peace with Moses. So that verse in Proverbs is a principle, not a given. There's another verse in Proverbs that unfortunately is only a principle. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he'll not depart from it. There are many godly people whose parents didn't quite follow along. We don't understand why. Only God understands. And the Lord said to Moses, in Midian, "Go back to Egypt, for all the men who were seeking you are dead." So now that gives us a hint at why Moses is hedging a little bit. He might still be afraid. And I have that verse from chapter 2. He was afraid. God says, go on back. Don't worry about it. The wanted posters in the post office, they're gone. All the men are dead. So Moses took his wife and his sons and had them ride on a donkey and went back to the land of Egypt. That should really be saying go back towards the land of Egypt, because we'll see what's going to happen along the way. And Moses took the staff of God. We talked about that staff last week. It's just a piece of wood. But when it's being used for God, it's God's piece of wood. So Moses resigns his job and goes back home to pack. Meanwhile, when you go back to Egypt, see that you go before Pharaoh. See that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I've put in your power. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. I want to concentrate on that phrase, harden heart. So there are all the times the word harden shows up in the book of Exodus, and some of them they are in the passive sense. So as for example, 7:13 says Pharaoh's heart was hardened. It doesn't say by whom. But you'll see earlier in Exodus that Pharaoh hardens his heart. Then you see in the middle of Exodus that the Lord is hardening Pharaoh's heart, and Pharaoh is hardening Pharaoh's heart. What God is doing is he's given Pharaoh opportunity. The Bible says that he's long-suffering toward usward, not willing that any should perish. But there comes a time when the Lord hardens the heart. You say, well, how can that be? Here's where I have Proverbs 1:24 written right next to Exodus 4:19. When we read these verses, think of Pharaoh, and then think of maybe somebody that's on your heart who needs to be saved. Because I have called and you refuse to listen, have stretched out my hand and no one has heeded. When we go through this narrative of Exodus, you're going to read about God's hand again and again and again. All of those plagues that we talk about are all related to God's hand. He says, I stretched out my hand and no one has heeded. Because you've ignored all my counsel and would have none of my reproof, I also will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when terror strikes you. When terror strikes you like a storm, think Pharaoh going down into that Red Sea with a wall of water on the right and the wall of water on the left. When terror strikes you like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you, then they will call upon me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but will not find me. Now, I don't know what the last moments of Pharaoh's life were like. I don't know if he was at the front of the army like a Napoleon, or if he was at the back of the army. I don't know if, in fact, he was at the back of the water, if the back of the army, if the water started caving in front of him and he saw his armies being swallowed up, or if the whole thing happened simultaneously. I don't know if in his last moment, you can think Adolf Hitler or Saddam Hussein. I don't know if in their last moment they say, oh God, I'm sorry, save me. But this verse talks about some people that they see their calamity upon them and they call out, but they'll not find me. My first pastor would say the two saddest words in the English language are too late. And the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you do before Pharaoh all the miracles that I've put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. And oh, by the way, don't forget the miracles, the snake, the leprosy, the water to blood thing. Then you shall say to Pharaoh. Now, when we get into this, we're going to find out a couple of things. First of all, he doesn't do those snake and leprosy and blood things until 3 more chapters later. So Moses is doing God's will, God's way, but sometimes he gets some things out of sync, just like you and me. Then you shall say to Pharaoh. So if he did those miracles, he would get Pharaoh's attention. But they would also keep Moses' attention. Can you imagine Moses walking into the courts of Pharaoh? Keep in mind, that's where he grew up, so he knew all the trappings, he knew everything about it. Could he, in the back of his mind, be thinking, what if I drop that stick on the ground and it stays a stick? What if I stick my hand into my robe and it comes out leprosy, and I stick it back in and it stays a leper? What if I pour the water on the ground and it just makes a puddle? But if those things were to happen, keep in mind, so far he hadn't done them. God said he was going to be able to. He hadn't done them in front of anybody else. He did them at the burning bush. But he never did it with an audience. Thus says the Lord, Israel is my firstborn, and I say to you, let my son go that he may serve me. If you refuse to let him go, behold, I will kill your firstborn son. Now, keep in mind, Egypt was a polytheistic society. It believed in many, many gods. And when you study those 10 plagues, every one of them relates to one of the gods of Egyptian. But here's Pharaoh, and he's sitting there, and he's got this whole laundry list of gods, and he's thinking, your God is the God over slaves, and I'm on top of you. So obviously your God is not as powerful as my God. Why should I let you go? So we're going through this process of coming into Egypt. He's dealt with the burning bush, Jethro, Zipporah, and the kids. But along the way, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him and sought to put him to death. Now, do you figure if God wanted to kill me, he would do it? Oh, yes, he's very effective. But I've already quoted 2 Peter that he's long-suffering. He's given Moses another opportunity. Now, we don't know what kind of symptom there was associated with sought to put him in death. Some people say he got deathly ill. I don't know. But he was there, and he's being sought to be put to death. And then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and touched Moses' feet with it. King James says she cast it at his feet and said, surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me. The King James says the bloody husband unto me. Sounds more like a British curse. A bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone. So God let Moses alone. NIV uses the Lord as opposed to he. And the Jewish Bible says, and God let Moshe be. Left him to be alone. Now, what about the fam? Left him to be alone? Zipporah took her 2 sons and went back to Jethro, went back to Midian. We know that when you study Exodus 18, because what happens is Moses is going to catch up with Aaron. Aaron and Moses are going to go to Egypt. They're going to go through the plagues. They're going to come out. And then Jethro is going to send Zipporah and sons back to Moses. That's chapter 18. So the family leaves Moses alone, and he's all alone. So here's Moses. He had his burning bush experience. He goes and visits Jethro. Jethro says, no problem, takes his wife and his kids, and they're marching on their way back to Egypt. And then God strikes him down, and his wife bails him out. It was then that she said, a bridegroom of blood, because of the circumcision. The only thing that separated an Egyptian from a Hebrew was the sign of the covenant. Now, this is a physical situation talking about the foreskin of the penis. But Paul in Romans talks about circumcision of the heart. Now, the only difference between the Egyptians and the Hebrews on the night of the death angel was what? The blood. Now, if I took my paintbrush and went over to my neighbor's house, the Bible doesn't talk about that condition, but if I took my paintbrush and covered the neighbor's house, I don't know what would happen to the neighbor's firstborn, because they painted, not because the wood needed paint, but they painted because of faith. A circumcision of the heart talks about faith. And so Zipporah is saying, Moses, you're supposed to be a man of faith. Secondly, Moses was supposed to be a leader. Lead by example. What kind of leader would that be if the sign of the covenant, the circumcision, wasn't even associated with the leader's son? Paul said, be ye followers of me as I am of Christ. As opposed to, don't do what I do, do what I say. Be ye followers of me as I am of Christ. So, Zipporah and the kids heading back to Midian, and then Moses is alone. Now, once again, notice how merciful and comforting God is. Aaron meets Moses. The Lord said to Aaron, go into the wilderness to meet Moses. So he went and met him at the mountain of God and kissed him at Horeb. Horeb is quite the scene. That's where Sinai is. That's where the burning bush is. That's where Moses is going to meet up with Aaron. If we fast forward to chapter 18, that's where Zipporah and his kids are going to come back and meet, all at the mountain of God. And Moses told Aaron, this is the first time Moses is going to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And Moses told Aaron all the words of the Lord with which he had sent him to speak, and all the signs that he had commanded him to do. Can you imagine that reunion? How many here have a brother? Okay. How many here see your brother now as often as when you were living in the same house with him? Gotcha. Tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. Aaron really didn't get to see Moses since Moses was weaned. He may have seen him riding the chariot as Aaron was sentenced to be a slave. But Moses was 40, and I'm sure the word traveled through the Hebrews about that son of Pharaoh's daughter and him killing that Egyptian. And now fast forward 40 years. Moses is 80, Aaron is 83, and now Moses is finally bearing his heart. Then Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the people of Israel. Aaron spoke. Keep in mind, Moses said, I am not eloquent. And so he looked for Aaron to be the spokesperson. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. Now, I want you to, for at least this little scene, wipe away the Charlton Heston movie. Because Aaron is just a prop in that movie in these scenes. But here, Aaron is the spokesperson, and we're going to see that Aaron performed the miracles. Aaron is front and center in this particular scenario. Aaron spoke all the words that the Lord had spoken to Moses and did the signs in the sight of the people. And the people believed. And when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads and worshiped. Notice that the worship came before the liberation. They were just glad to hear that their prayers have been heard. We'll have to wait a while for the prayers to be answered, but the prayers have been heard. So, We're coming all the way down. We have all those check marks taken care of. We have the Hebrews. And now we're going to talk about Pharaoh. And bad goes to worse. Chapter 9. The people believed, and they bowed their heads and worshiped. But Pharaoh, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh. Now, Moses and Aaron went and said. So it doesn't say which one of those two said. Moses and Aaron went and said to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, let my people go, that they may hold a feast to me in the wilderness. But Pharaoh said, who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord. Well, he's going to know the Lord, but it's probably going to be too late. I do not know the Lord, and moreover, I will not let Israel go. Not shown and not mentioned. The Lord told Moses, show the signs and then speak up. He says, see that you do the signs before the miracles, and then let my son go that he may serve me. He not only didn't say those things, he failed to mention that God's going to kill his firstborn. Then they said, the God of the Hebrews has met with us. Let us go a 3 days journey. So Moses, he bounces right back, and now he's negotiating. He just had an open-ended, let my people go. And now he's going to try to couch it and say, just give us 3 days off. Well, think about it. If one or two guys said, we need to have a few days off, Pharaoh might say, sure, go ahead. But the whole workforce, 3 days off, what would that do to the GDP? What would that do to the bricks and the mortar and the cities? He said, no way. Moses should not have been surprised. We hear that the Hebrews will listen to you. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless compelled by a mighty hand. Well, so far there hasn't been a mighty hand. There was just some guy came back after 40 years on the lam saying, let my people go. So I will stretch out my mighty hand and strike Egypt with all the wonders that I will do in it. And after that, he will let you go. So going from bad to worse. The king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And we're going to see something here very similar to in Jesus' day. They had the publicans. The publicans were Jewish people who decided to aid and abet the Romans by collecting taxes. And we're going to see here that the foremen, you had the taskmasters, they were Egyptians. But the foremen, they were Jews who decided to work for the Egyptians. I guess in that case, they wouldn't get stripes in their back and they wouldn't have to make bricks. They just have to tell people what to do. But the king of Egypt said to them, Moses and Aaron, why do you take the people away from their work? Get back to your burdens. And Pharaoh said, behold, the people of the land are now many, and you make them rest from their burdens. The same day, Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen. Now, we're going to see something here relative to timing. Here is Moses and Aaron. They show up. They talk to the Hebrews. They do their three things. The Hebrews believe, and they usher themselves right on into Pharaoh's courts, and they don't get the same kind of reception. And what we're going to read is Pharaoh says, we're not only going to make you make bricks and build those cities, we're going to take away your straw. But you still have to make the same numbers of bricks. I'm coming back to the thought of timing. In 1883, some archaeologists, they were sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania. Some archaeologists discovered the city of Pythos, one of the two cities that were being built, Pythos and Ramses. And what they discovered was in the ruins, the bricks at the bottom of the buildings were made with straw. And then the bricks in the middle of the building were made with stubble. And the bricks at the top of the building were made with nothing but clay. And so for them to go and find that building that over time the bricks changed, that tells me that there was a pretty large period of time between Pharaoh saying, take their straw away, to the time when they left Egypt. We don't see that with Charlton Heston. There's a pretty strong window of time there when all that pain was going on. And we'll be studying these different plagues. Did the Hebrews go out and do their brick thing when the frogs were climbing on top of them? The Bible doesn't say. But we do know physical evidence that it took some time. The same day Pharaoh commanded the taskmasters of the people and their foremen, you shall no longer give the people straw to make bricks as in the past. Let them go and gather straw for themselves. But the number of bricks that they made in the past you shall impose on them, and you shall by no means reduce it, for they are idle. Therefore they cry, let us go and offer sacrifice to our God. Let heavier work be laid on the men, that they may labor at it and pay no regard to lying words. Now, think of the passage of this information. Pharaoh, needless to say, they didn't have all the taskmasters in the courtroom. So Pharaoh's talking to the big bosses and they say, go and tell the taskmasters. The taskmasters go and tell the foreman, and the foreman have to execute with the people. So here you see 1883, they found that the bricks, as time went on, there were less and less pieces of straw associated with the brick. So the taskmasters, the Egyptians, and the foremen, the Hebrews, the foreman of the people, went out and said to the people, thus says Pharaoh, I will not give you straw. Go and get your straw yourselves, wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced in the least. And the people were scattered. Look at that phrase. Throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, they didn't have hay balers. They didn't have trucks to move the stuff around. And they didn't have an opportunity to reduce their daily quota. And yet they're running all over the land of Egypt looking for something to put in that clay. And the taskmasters were urgent, saying, complete your work, your daily tasks each day when there is no straw. And the foreman of the people, whom Pharaoh's taskmasters had set over them, were beaten. So there's your hint that they weren't lower level Egyptians. They were Hebrews. They were beaten, and they were asked, why have you not done all your task of making bricks today and yesterday as in the past? Now we're going to see what the foremen are going to do. The foremen are going to bypass the taskmasters and go straight to Pharaoh and say, hey, what's the problem? It's not our problem. It's your people that are taking away the straw because they have no clue about this Moses incident. Then the foreman of the people of Israel came and cried to Pharaoh, why do you treat your servants like this? Were they part of the preaching service where Aaron said that God was going to let them go? We don't know. Were they part of the believe and worship? We don't know. No straw is given to your servants, yet they say to us, make bricks. And behold, your servants are beaten, but the fault is in your own people. That's the Hebrew saying to the Egyptian king, it's your people's problem. But he said, Pharaoh said, you are idle. You are idle. That is why I say, let us go and... You are idle. You are idle. That is why you say, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now, get back to work. Get back to work. No straw will be given you, but you must deliver the same number of bricks. The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble. Now, labor negotiations in our world and in our country is very different than labor negotiations back then. At one point, one of the Muslim leaders wanted to have the walls of Jerusalem rebuilt. And the engineers decided they were going to take a shortcut and build it a little bit differently and save the king some money. Well, he found out about it. He had all those engineers beheaded. The foreman of the people of Israel saw that they were in trouble when they said, "You shall by no means reduce your number of bricks, your daily task each day." And they met Moses and Aaron, who were waiting for them as they came out from Pharaoh. So here's Moses and Aaron. They knew that the foremen were going to be going into Pharaoh. So they're standing outside the court waiting to hear what's going to happen. Well, again, they shouldn't have been surprised because God already told Moses that they were going to be released by his mighty hand. And the foreman said to them, "The Lord look on you and judge, because you have made us stink in the sight of Pharaoh and his servants, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." So now we know that how they figured they were in trouble. They had a death sentence over their heads. If you're not going to make the bricks, we're going to eliminate you guys and find a different set of foremen. They said, "The Lord look on you and judge." You know, when the pastor's talking about streets of gold and gates of pearl, it's nice and easy to sing, "Oh, how I love Jesus," and shake his hand on the way out. But if the pastor's touching on sin in my life, I should be shaking his hand and telling him thank you, but maybe I don't. Maybe I think, "Pastor, you're meddling. You stink." And that's what these guys are saying to Moses. "You stink. Let God choose between you and us." Then Moses turned to the Lord and said, "O Lord, why have you done evil to this people? Why did you ever send me?" The JTSV, "See, God, I told you so. I told you they wouldn't listen to me. Why did you send me? For since I came to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has done evil to this people, and you have not delivered your people at all." I don't know about you, but I've asked those questions a lot. Why, God? Why me? Why now? I don't need this. Why this? And once you get that out of your system, you come up a notch. How am I going to get through this? How am I going to get out of this situation? But the Lord said to Moses, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh." Pharaoh played his hand. Pharaoh already had the people under subjection. He already had the leader saying, "If you're not going to do this, you're going to die." If he kills off the foreman and he kills off another batch of foremen, and he kills off another batch of foremen, what's he going to do? Kill off his labor force? Pharaoh has played out his hand. So God says, "Now you shall see what I will do to Pharaoh. For with a strong hand, he will send them out, and with a strong hand, he will drive them out of his hand." And God spoke to Moses and said to him, "I am the Lord." I'm going to invite you to read ahead. We're into chapter 6. And in chapter 6, you see 5 times, "I am the Lord." Moses asked the question, number 1, why? And number 2, how? And God answers, "I am the Lord." That is the why, and that is the how. Anybody know who that is? If you're into youth ministry, his name is Bob Lenz. He's a well-known speaker. He's already spoken at Octorara, but he travels all over the world. And one of his key phrases is this: when the world says no way, you say Yahweh. Why? How? Yahweh, I am the Lord. Why is this happening to you? Because he's the Lord. How am I going to get out of this predicament? He is the Lord.